You know how some grammar rules you learned in school just feel off? Like they don't really match how people actually talk. Well, today, we're going to dig into the wild history behind those rules and find out why your gut feeling might be more on the money than your old textbook ever was.
I mean, think about it. I'm sure a teacher at some point insisted that it is I is the only correct way to say it. But really, who talks like that? It's me is what we all say. It just sounds right. So where did this huge gap between the official rules and, real life come from?
Well, the answer comes from this centuries old approach called traditional grammar analysis, or TGA for short. For a very long time, this was the way people studied language. But it was built on let's just say, some pretty specific ideas that led to the exact rules we still get tripped up on today. So, what was the biggest problem with TGA? Well, it really started with its whole attitude. It wasn't all that interested in the lively, messy, and frankly more interesting way people actually spoke. It was almost completely focused on words written on a page, and that created some massive blind spots. This is what's known as a selective attitude. Basically, traditional grammarians decided that only certain types of language were even worth studying, and that was the super formal, literary style you'd find in a classic novel. Everyday spoken language, with all its shortcuts, slang, and natural flow, that was seen as just inferior, so they pretty much ignored it completely.
And this brings us right back to where we started. TGA held up the formal rule, it is I, as the absolute gold standard. But the reality for pretty much everyone is the phrase on the right. TGA just wasn't built to analyze or even appreciate the language of our everyday conversations.
But it went even deeper than just turning a blind eye to speech. TGA was also super prescriptive. What that means is it didn't just describe language as it is. Oh no, it prescribed rules for how language should be. It was more like a judge, stamping some language as good and others as bad. Here's a total classic you've definitely heard. Never end a sentence with a preposition. But we do it all the time, right? That's the book I was looking for. It's perfectly natural, and everyone knows what you mean. Trying to force it to follow the rule gives you something like, that is the book for which I was looking. I mean, who talks like that? It's a perfect example of a prescriptive rule just completely clashing with reality. So this judgmental attitude really shaped TGA's methods. Instead of seeing language as this big, living, interconnected system, it had a habit of focusing on individual words, one by one. And by doing that, it often missed the forest for the trees. This led to a huge focus on history, or what's sometimes called a diachronic approach. Traditional grammarians were obsessed with etymology, a word's origin story. They genuinely believed that to understand a word, you had to find its oldest, most ancient meaning, because that was its real or correct meaning. And you can see how they worked right here. Grammarians would pour endless energy into tracing a simple word like the all the way back to Old English. Now, don't get me wrong, that's really fascinating if you're a historian, but does it actually help you use the word the in a sentence today? Not so much. I absolutely love this analogy because it just hits the nail on the head. You can't understand modern medicine by only studying medieval cures, right? It's fascinating, but it's not enough. In the same way, you can't really get a grip on a modern language just by looking at its ancient history. And layered on top of all this was an item-centered approach. So TGA was brilliant at breaking a sentence into pieces and labeling them, yep, that's a noun, that's a verb, that's an adjective, but it wasn't so great at explaining how all those pieces actually snap together to create meaning. It kind of ignored the importance of syntax. For instance, take the super simple sentence. A traditional grammarian would have no problem telling you that cat is a noun, chased is a verb, and dog is another noun. Easy enough. But here's the million-dollar question that TJA really fumbled. The words are identical, but the meaning is the complete opposite. Why? It's because in English, word order is everything. TGA's laser focus on individual words meant it just didn't have a good way to explain the absolutely crucial role of sentence structure. And honestly, maybe the biggest problem of all was that TGA wasn't even using the right blueprints. It was borrowing its rulebook from totally different languages and even from other fields of study. And these models were just a terrible fit for English. Specifically, TGA was fixated on Latin. For these grammarians, Latin was it. It was the peak of linguistic perfection. So what they did was they took the rules of Latin grammar and tried to force other languages, like English, to fit into that same box.
And here is the core of that problem. Latin is a highly inflected language. That means the endings of the words tell you the meaning, not the order they're in. You can shuffle the words around and the sentence still makes sense. English is the total opposite. Our meaning depends almost entirely on word order. So applying Latin's rules to English, it's literally like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It just does not work.
TGA didn't just borrow from other languages, it also borrowed heavily from other fields, like philosophy and formal logic. It tried to analyze language like it was some kind of perfect rational math equation. But as we all know, human language is often anything but logical.
Just think about the common phrase, I could care less. Logically, that means you still have some care left to give. But we all understand that the intended meaning is the exact opposite, that you don't care at all. Language follows its own social and cultural rules, a kind of logic that you can't always cram into a neat philosophical formula.
So when you put all of these limitations together, one after another, you really start to see why traditional grammar analysis was, at the end of the day, not enough. In fact, all its weaknesses created a big opening for a new, more scientific way of understanding how language actually works. So let's just recap the whole thing. TGA was selective because it ignored how people actually talk. It was prescriptive, acting like a judge instead of a scientist. It was obsessed with history, not current use. It was item-centered, focusing on single words instead of the whole sentence. And finally, it borrowed a model from Latin that didn't fit and was dependent on a type of pure logic that just doesn't apply to language. Each one of these things kept it from seeing language as the amazing, dynamic thing it really is. And out of all those limitations, a whole new field was born: modern linguists. Instead of telling people how they should talk, modern linguists aim to describe how language actually works. They study the whole shebang, spoken, written, formal, informal, as one big, living, breathing system of communication.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If grammar isn't just a set of dusty old rules that often don't even make sense, then what is it? Maybe it's not about do's and don'ts at all. Maybe it's just the incredible, complex, always changing system that we humans have created to share our ideas with one another. Something to think about.